I'm not okay. There are so many times in my life when I've wanted to say that, but haven't felt able to. Every second of every day, there are people fighting battles inside themselves that no one else can see. And I have been one of those people more than once. As I stand here today, adrenaline is coursing through my body, and I'm fully expecting a familiar wave of red blotchiness to creep up over my chest or my neck as I talk to you. But I'm okay with it, because it's a part of who I am. As human beings, we think, we feel, we experience things, and we react. And this is how my body chooses to respond to me standing up to speak every single time. I've learnt to calm my mind and steady my voice enough to be able to share my experiences and thoughts publicly. But my ability to do this, and the personal resilience that I possess today, came at the emotional cost of having to trudge my way through abuse, trauma, and mental illness. But resilience doesn't have to come at a price. And whilst it can grow through overcoming life challenges, it doesn't have to be this way. Being able to step up and take personal responsibility for changing things for yourself is so empowering. So why not show children and young people how to do that? Resilience is becoming a growing consideration in education and has been very recently recognised in UK legislation for the latest education inspection framework. And this is something that I welcome with open arms, because right now we are presented with a very real mental health challenge in our schools. With an estimated 3 children in every classroom experiencing a diagnosable mental health condition, steps need to be taken to ensure that academic learning and emotional well-being go hand in hand. This, I believe, could be the what next for education. Over the course of their education, a child can spend over 7,800 hours at school. They are used to and largely open to learning whilst in the classroom, so why not ring-fence some of those hours and focus them specifically on building children and young people up emotionally? Now, some may argue that the curriculum is already jam-packed and that there's no space for additional emotional literacy or for teaching resilience, and I take that on board. But I also know that precious classroom time was spent teaching me a lot of things whilst I was at school that I have never needed to know again. Learning how to make woolly pom-poms at primary school, for example. Or several years later, learning how to tell someone in Spanish that there's no toilet paper. In case you ever find yourselves in a situation where you need to know it, and I sincerely hope you don't, it's no hay papel higiénico. Now, I don't mean to sound flippant, but my reason for sharing that with you is because I learnt that Spanish phrase 25 years ago, and even though I've never had to use it again, I still remember it. So maybe some of the time spent teaching children things that they may never really need to know could be better spent on focusing on their emotional well-being, on teaching them tools and techniques that could stay with them for the rest of their lives to be called upon if and when they ever need them. Now, don't get me wrong, there was a lot of academic value in my education, and it certainly prepared me for further learning at university, but it did fall short of equipping me emotionally. And when life got tough for me during my time there, I didn't know how to help myself. I wasn't resilient. And I ended up having to drop out of uni for a year because I'd become so severely depressed. I was 21 the first time I was medicated for depression and anxiety disorders, but my battles within myself started with experiences I had while still at school. And I'd like to briefly take you all back there with me now. So it's 1996. I'm 15 years old and I am living my 90s fashion best life. I'm wearing the Levi 501s I'd begged my parents to get me for my birthday, along with a black puffer jacket. Back then, all I needed to feel good about myself was for my wild curly hair to be under control, to have a slick of Rimmel heather shimmer lipstick across my lips, and to be covered in way too much body spray. So I'm with a group of my girlfriends and we're busy chatting and gossiping away as we jump off the bus, and then it hits me. A Peugeot 205 on a 60-mile-per-hour road. I'm not sure at which point I lost consciousness or when I fully regained it. I don't recall my body smashing the windscreen or biting through my own chin on impact. I don't remember bouncing down the road on my back when the car stopped moving, but I know I still have tiny pieces of the grit from that road in the scars that I've been left with. As it turns out, my puffer jacket flying up behind my head as I ricocheted across the road actually saved my life. So I will forever have a very special place in my heart for 90s fashion. On my first day back at school, a boy congratulated me on my face not being too fucked up. That's what he said as he stood blocking my way out of the classroom as he looked me up and down. He kissed his lips at me, sniggered, and then walked off with his mates laughing. And I just sat there, in a wheelchair, wanting the ground to swallow me up. And that moment and those few words were all it took for my 15-year-old self to start believing that my worth was largely dependent on my looks and what other people thought of me. That's how easily it happened. When I was 15, girls didn't need to know how to contour their makeup or have their eyebrows on fleek. Social media and smartphones didn't exist, and selfies weren't a thing. But I still cared what other people thought about me, both girls and boys. And I took a lot of the things that were said to me personally, and I internalized it all. Because I didn't know how to be resilient, and I couldn't bounce back, and I didn't possess the self-confidence to just brush things off and be myself. So I sucked it all up, pushed it all down, smiled, and carried on. It was something that quickly became a habit for me, and over time it developed into my go-to response. Considering I missed quite a bit of school whilst recovering and had to sit my mock exams for my GCSEs in a wheelchair, it came as no surprise to me that my results were way below the standard I was capable of. I couldn't get offered a place at the sixth form I wanted to attend with those grades, and so I had to ask my teachers to validate that I was good enough by writing to the college on my behalf. And that probably did just as much damage to my self-esteem as that obnoxious boy. But I kept all of those thoughts and feelings to myself because I wasn't resilient and I didn't know how to bounce back. So I just sucked it all up, pushed it all down, smiled, and carried on. Those two experiences following my accident marked the start of me devaluing myself. They were the first steps on a path that led me to fall in love with the wrong boy less than a year later, and spending the next decade of my life in an emotionally abusive and coercive relationship. Everything I experienced during those 10 years affected and shaped me in so many ways. Emotional abuse is so complex. The wounds and the harm caused by it are invisible to the naked eye. But if I could have worn mine on my skin, I'd have been unrecognizable. As a child, I was taught the phrase, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." Maybe you were too. And as a kid, I totally believed it, probably even used it in retaliation against my little brother a few times. But by the age of 26, after 10 years of emotional abuse, control, and sexual coercion, I actually wanted the stick. And I'd got so desperate that I'd even deliberately started pushing him for the stones. Because I believed that if he physically hurt me, I'd have no excuse to stay. The harm would be visible for once, and somebody would see what he had done. They would make me leave him, and it would stop. Admitting that I wanted my partner to hurt me in that way still makes me feel physically sick. But remembering how inadequate I felt in being able to save myself is the reason I'm standing here talking to you today. I'd got so desperate that I couldn't see another way out, because I wasn't resilient and I couldn't bounce back, and I didn't possess the confidence to change things for myself. But I know it could have been different, and I see that so clearly now. And that's the difference that can be brought about for children and young people by teaching and fostering resilience in schools. Because it is easier to build up a child or a young person than it is to try and fix any broken adult. I always wanted the fairy tale. But the legacy I was left with was emotional and mental scars and the most brutal self-talk you could imagine. as the words he had used against me over the years slowly became my own. After that, it really didn't matter what anyone else said to me, because I'd already become my own worst enemy. I took all of the blame and the guilt and I put it all on me. I carried it around with me everywhere I went. I used to exhaust myself trying to hide it all away because I was so ashamed. And I would convince myself all the time that I was okay when I really wasn't. I lied to myself and the people I love and care about every single day. I'd wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, and barely recognize the woman staring back at me. But I could feel her desperation and feel her exhaustion, and I didn't want to be her anymore. I'd got so used to surviving rather than living that this was my new normal. I'd spent so many years sucking it up, pushing it down and burying it deep that I didn't know how to change things. I didn't know how to be resilient. But I know it can be different than that. And I know that that's a difference that can be brought about for children and young people as we look to the future and ask ourselves, what next? During my early 30s, I hated myself and my body for not being able to carry a baby to full term. Each miscarriage became yet another stick I used to beat myself with. And when consultants couldn't find a medical reason for me not being able to sustain a pregnancy, my self-talk began to whisper, well, maybe you don't deserve to be a mum. I was 34 years old when my son was born. And 3 days after holding him in my arms for the first time, I had to helplessly watch him fight for his life following a brain hemorrhage. Weeks and months after bringing him home, I relived those moments, those terrifying scenes again and again and again, both in my dreams and when I was awake. My mental health was well and truly slipping through my fingers, and I felt like I was drowning. But I was a mum now, and this tiny, tiny human was depending on me. So I made the decision to step up and change things, still not because I believed I was worth it, but because I knew my baby boy was. And I didn't know how to be resilient because I'd never learnt to be, and now I needed to be more than ever. And the honesty is that you remember as an adult so much of the stuff that you were taught at school. But the harsh reality is that when you are heading towards rock bottom, you don't need to know how to make a woolly pom-pom. And when you feel like you're losing your mind, knowing the Spanish translation for toilet paper is not going to save you. It's really not. So please, let's not waste the opportunity to better emotionally equip children and young people as we look towards the future. I didn't know where to begin, but I knew that something had to change because my son deserved the best mummy he could have. So I started by taking personal responsibility for my thoughts, my feelings, and the choices I made every single day going forward. I knew that if I was ever going to be able to step out from my past, I had to work my way through it, and I had to forgive myself. But to be able to take those steps, I first had to take personal responsibility for everything I'd allowed during that 10-year relationship, for all the awful things I forgave him for, and for all the times I stayed when I needed to leave him. And I deliberately used the word stayed because I always had a choice, even if I didn't recognize that or believe it at the time. It's important to me and people I share my experiences with to acknowledge that, because the teenage girl that I once was would never have believed that any of this could happen to her. And yet it did. And by the time it was happening, she didn't know how to change things because she wasn't resilient. And she didn't possess the confidence or self-belief to think that she deserved any better. So over time, she accepted the love she thought she deserved, and she hid what was going on away from the rest of the world. My challenges and experiences have all contributed to the woman I am today. Not because they happened, but because at the age of 35, I finally chose to no longer be defined by them. And the truth is that often we can't control what happens to us in life, but we always, always have a choice. And that choice is how we respond and who we choose to become. Our ability to choose a positive response, to possess the self-confidence to step up and change things for ourselves, and to be able to bounce back from adversity is called resilience, and it can be taught. Emotional well-being and positive mental health are so important, especially for children and young people, because no amount of academic success or likes and followers on Facebook and Insta are ever going to compensate for knowing that you are already enough just the way you are, and that you are worthy and deserving of having a happy and fulfilled life. Growing up today seems harder and more confusing than ever, and a whole world apart from what it was like for us. Children and young people right now, as well as in the future, need more support. And they need to be taught the tools and techniques to build themselves up emotionally, to feel empowered, and to develop their personal resilience. In a society where statistics tell us that teenage girls are more likely to experience partner abuse than any other age group, and where half of all mental health conditions are established by the age of 14, this vision of the what next for education, the thoughts that I've shared with you today, and the idea I want to spread has the potential to positively impact many lives, and even save some. Thank you.